メタトロンほどのエネルギーが導く文明の行き先は何だ。
情けねえ。ケン、いつ爆発するかわからねえ。ここを出るぞ。
With Dingo's newfound development, he starts treating Ken with a bit more sport. If she can't handle her orbital frame without an onboard AI, it's up to you to rescue the stubborn bitch. She gives you Wisp for this purpose. It allows you to grab distant targets and objects, so it fits with Dingo's character development of holding and accepting people by empowering the action. Reaching out to catch the sun, The music takes an uncommonly optimistic tone now that Dingo's finally overcome his core flaw to ascend with Ken to the top of the facility. Although if you take her to the bottom and fry her up a bit, she'll take her jacket off for a cutscene or two. Ken's had an issue all the way through the game where they set her up for her own redemption arc by having her be a complete monster to turn it around once Dingo is receptive. Their first attempt at this is to make her reliant on the player and give her panicking voice clips a cute charm so that she wins you over. The biggest obstacle to that is the abysmal dub. Returning characters like Ada, Leo and Viola improve on their performances since last time, but every new actor is entirely miscast and the direction is non-sequitorial. Dingo has a Dante-like cocky charm and stints of depressed, sarcastic black humour. He entirely loses this in English. Ken in particular has a more drastic issue. The player perception of Ken is in a serious uphill battle because of just how awful her actions have been towards the player and Dingo, a relatively older man. In Japanese, her voice actress has a kind of immature, tsundere charm, and seeing her own hard, authoritative edge melt away when she desperately needs your help is endearing. You almost forget the depth of her sins. But when you give her an equally mature voice to Dingo, it juxtaposes against her immature entitlement and psychopathy. You lose hope that she can grow past it. I highly recommend the undub which you can find on Nexus mods. She either strains her surgical wounds or Dingo's heart supplement is struggling with the blood flow for some reason. They should really put a second seat in these things. The cockpit can get pretty tight when there's a lady sitting on your lap. She apologizes for what she's done to him at least. Dingo starts inquiring about his passenger, showing some real character development, or he's trying to take his mind off something. Ken Marinera's surname happens to be after her birth name on Mars, confirming she's not an Earthling after all. She became a soldier following her father's example. Her backstory is slowly not adding up, but she takes counter-interest in Dingo. And now he finally talks frankly about his past. Recounting his story in his own words revolves the scene around his opinions and portrayal of the events. You see what Dingo sees important to mention, and his bitterness at the affair. Joining Barham in the naive hope of giving Mars independence and freedom from Earthling tyranny, he now laments the irony that he sees around him. His final mission was the breaking point, where he delivered a large quantity of Metatron to the Antilia colony under Noman's orders. It was a success, but on the return journey they were ambushed on Callisto, totally outnumbered. Dingo told his unit that reinforcements were coming, when really his request had been denied. Noman told him to give up, smiling. Despite leading the charge, Dingo was the only survivor. You might imagine he did follow Noman's orders to the end. He gave up and hid on Callisto. Ken raises the argument that he should have returned and created a revolt. She's heard rumors about Dingo even after he left. It's easy to know why given his performance so far. Again, he deals with pain using pitch-black sarcasm. The argument slows down when neither of them will break their stances. Use power for the right things, says Ken. We're gonna go get something to deal with ANUBIS' teleportation. Dingo knows a weirdo who, for some reason, lives in the world's least logically designed facility. There's a section where you're tested for your careful maneuverability by following Ken's directions at a snail's pace. It's, at the very least, an interesting way of forcing the player to place trust in Ken, and they don't allow you to talk back to her likely for this reason. They do, however, allow Ken to talk back to Dingo, becoming indignant when you respect Ada's advice or telling you to stop screaming in her ears. She can be impressed or supportive though, depending on your efforts or doubts. In all, this section can either be endearingly annoying or just annoying, and it all hinges on how forgiving you can be with Ken. Just a tip, the lights are often goalposts, and you can tank one hit on hard mode. Arriving at the structure is a contradictorily designed area. You can either go straight to the next stage if you guess right, or you can take the most suggested route by the level design, and you get more gameplay and a sub-weapon. New enemies include the aforementioned Mosquito and Spider. The Narita are extremely mobile and borrow from Nephthys' moveset by having a very well telegraphed dash and attack. They arrive around the time you get Giza, so it's a suggested countermeasure for their hummingbird-like movement. Leopardo skit around the surface, going into the air for short periods of time before returning to their hunting phase. They spend too much time at long range, leaving them vulnerable to most of the better sub-weapons that you've already gotten. Clods shoot long-range, slow-moving shots that overwhelm in their quantity and cause unsuspectingly significant hit stun. And at close range, they'll grab and body slam you really, really hard. They also house a raptor like the mummy heads. The new additions aren't bad. They fill niches and are memorable enough in their designs. They're designed around creating spatial considerations. You never want to be too close to a Clod without covering fire, but you never want to leave a Cyclops to a free-ranged burst attack. Pardo are most dangerous when they get too close, but do you have enough time to take them out while the narrator apply pressure on you? As for the sub-weapons you get from this section, Mummy returns, an invincible shield that heals you for heavy sub-gauge. It'll carry you through some boss fights if you struggle, but there are better things to spend your sub-energy on. Halberd returns, far easier to control and utilize. Homing missiles solve every problem within a mile radius at the cost of great sub-gauge. The sub-weapon menu would once pause the game, or you'd cycle awkwardly until you found your weapon. This made relying on Ada's advice have the better game flow. In the newest remaster, they've hacked together a very modern 12x4 D-pad item wheel, freeing a button dedicated now to a permanent grab command. Part of this was a concession for the loss of pressure sensitivity in the face buttons of modern controllers, which determined how sub-weapons were fired. Moving them to R2 was one of the only remaining pressure-sensitive buttons. Unfortunately, the pressure sensitivity of primary fire is lost forever, but this is a small price to pay for ZOE 2 to reach new tactical heights. Anubis Zone of the Enders The Second Runner is truly a timeless classic. Unfortunately, it hasn't been treated like one. It was originally released on the same month as Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire and Zelda Wind Waker. ZOE 2 was undermarketed in the West to begin with, and given an uncaring dub that obscures and makes laughable a rather well-accomplished narrative. The worst parts of all being Nakama translated as buddy or pal, making very adult themes feel childish. This video has taken far longer to make than usual because of the depth of the translation errors obscuring the original themes and concepts, especially where military ranks, jargon and philosophy is involved. This resulted in an underperforming game at launch in terms of sales. The PlayStation 3 edition of Zone of the Enders HD underperformed literally. It hardly ran at 720p 30fps, but then was later patched to 1080-60 after harsh backlash. More than ZOE 1 HD ever got. Despite more fanciful ad campaigns, the damage had been done. The game sold relatively similarly to its original launch despite a vastly inflated console consumer base, and being bundled with a demo for Metal Gear Rising Revengeance. I guess they were hoping lightning would strike twice on that one. At this time, there have been two publicly known attempts at making a third title in the series, the Guy Savage minigame in MGS3, and the Enders project a decade later, both cancelled, likely related to poor sales of this game, twice. This new remaster Mars has had no backlash, it's been marketed well. There's talk that Cygame would be happy to make a sequel, Konami willing, but this franchise was entirely mishandled to begin with. They began with forcing a multimedia approach where it didn't belong. ZOE 1 and IDOLO worked well together, but the game suffers without the OVA's background. There's also a gimmick tactical RPG for the Game Boy Advance, and a complete anime series about an alcoholic space dad trying to reconnect with his family using the power of an orbital frame that has the personality of a Japanese teenage schoolgirl. It is rare to see a property this mishandled. It's infuriating. Yet ZOE 2 somehow takes elements from all the properties before it and executes them masterfully. The tragic aspects of IDOLO, the darkly comedic aspects of Dolores I, the horror aspects of ZOE 1, and the rich political lore of Fist of Mars. The series somehow finally consolidated into a single identity in ZOE 2 despite the entirely new directorial and creative staff and abandoning open plot threads. Unfortunately, the well was poisoned. It might have been dry to begin with. This franchise, which was so disastrously mishandled, received the perfect game that nobody asked for. The price of a send-off this magnificent is that everything else in the series is a footnote, the growing pains of a franchise that has been forgotten. This isn't to say ZOE 2 is flawless. The next environment is a navigational nightmare, where the 3D environments have become a one-hit kill. We've escalated to this point slowly. This isn't unexpected, and your spatial awareness will have developed healthily, so this is a worthy challenge that the game throws nearly all enemy types at you with, and it's frequently checkpointed as well. Lloyd's a creepy motherfucker. He doesn't have a large amount of depth, but he certainly does have an aura. Him and his frame are outlandishly designed by Kazuma Kaneko of Shin Megami Tensei fame, and his boss fight's the final test of how well you can adhere to verbal directions. You can look at this as a test of faith. His appearance has that kind of offensive zen to it. This entire section has been seen as such. Dingo has proven himself of having moved on, trusting his new comrades. It amounts to a lot of dancing around hurdles before you can get to the fight. There's value in the novelty at least, entertaining, well built toward, but it isn't really enticing nor intelligent. It's the only noticeable dip in enjoyment through the whole game. Dingo proves himself capable of defeating this geezer, so in his mystic wisdom, he gives Dingo a program to match Anubis' maneuverability. That's a hell of a promise. But the system updates on orbital frames apparently takes a while, so we can't have fun with that just yet. But speak of the devil and he shall appear. Ken gets separated from Dingo as the roof caves in. Lloyde had warned us that no one's become possessed with the power of Metatron, which informs his insanity. But there's more to it than just that. His statements come off as objective and nihilistic, but he infers religious purpose from them. Dingo accuses Noman in the exact same way Leo once had. This time he elaborates a tad. It's not his orders, it's all according to the will of Metatron. This sounds utterly ridiculous. Can energy really have its own will? Well, perhaps in a mythical sense, yes. There's too many coincidences in this story to be put down to writing convenience. The undertones of a game are a test of Dingo's character, and it's been proposed in a very mythologically Egyptian way. Being put into Z.O.E was even an interesting coincidence because it anchored him into this exact situation. And now it's revealed the Metatron Dingo delivered to the Antilia colony in its final mission ended up being used to sculpt Z.O.E and Anubis. Even the mech he's imprisoned in is the sum purpose of his comrades' deaths. Armand's purpose is a tool of destruction according to Lloyde, and Dingo and Z.O.E are a fundamental component of it, against Noman and Anubis. There is a wheel of fate turning in the background. There always has been since the first game. The watchful eye of Jupiter was replaced with the scorching eye of the sun burning down on us. Gas giants like Jupiter are in ways protostars, whereas the sun itself is a large, ongoing nuclear reaction. Be it some creator or a force of nature, the universe is clearly toying with us. Anubis Round 2 is the same other than your new capabilities in a more obstacle-rich environment. But this time it doesn't end in defeat. We end on the slightest of damage against Anubis. It's still hopeless, but we're getting there. At the last second, Lloyde uses a decoy to carry Z.O.E the fuck out of there. It leaves him and Ken stranded, the camera cutting out before we get a first-hand account of how Noman treats traitors. Over the radio, Ken gives what could be a dying message to the swelling string rendition of the primary motif. Dingo is visibly and audibly pained as he can't risk going back to save her. As if to twist a knife, she asks him if they're friends now. It's all going wrong again, so soon. He can't respond because he'd be admitting it to himself. But she asks again, and Dingo finally relents, allowing the pain in. But she comforts him. Ken's at peace with her fate, because Dingo will complete the mission in her place. She says his unit on Callisto probably thought the same thing. This rings deep when you consider what the Metatron went on to become, and what he has to do now. He has a duty as a survivor, but not just to the mission but to her living desires. It's a very coded way of talking around their objective, but the wording implies more than that. She's saying even if the people around him weren't so lucky, it's okay for him to carry on so long as he carries on their spirit. Not imprisoned by survivor's guilt, but empowered by camaraderie. He needs to honor their wishes as he would were they still here. It's okay that he lives on. This is one of the strongest emotional moments for the game, and it will be followed by the strongest gameplay of the game until the very end, which happens to be a real third of the game. There's no surprise game overs, there's no backtracking. We only move forward. We see a bit later that she survived under Noman's care, but that doesn't undermine this scene or the following set piece. That fleet we dodged by moving over the surface is now directly in our flight path. It's time to destroy a fucking armada with the most heroic music in the game, blowing out the full motif in sampled brass. Now, it's not mechanically complex, it's actually a bit of a breather. The environment is free air, other than the ships, but we're gonna fix that. The port and starboard sides of each have miniature homing cannons that can be destroyed for sub-energy supplement, and the relatively slow-moving frames try to attack you. The bridge holds a giant slow-moving limited-angle beam cannon that will ruin your entire day, but unfortunately doesn't commit friendly fire. This cannon needs to be destroyed to keep the bridge heightened, allowing you to set up shop on the stern and use your own vector cannon. And the vector cannon. This bad boy has such a charge time that you can't be dealing with enemies at all. A single hit will cancel your preparations. But there's so much nonsense. Energy lines connect, Z.O.E visibly straps itself down to the deck so you can deal with the recoil. And the best part is that you can talk back to Ada and scream, "Ike!" as you fire. And the recoil is so hardcore you just get ousted from the whole situation. which makes total sense. Condensed space uncondensing would surely exert a force. The mission escalates in difficulty with pressure from respawning enemies and general player attrition and a lack of checkpoints. Despite this, it's more of a mission of spectacle. You earn ownership over the skies of Mars, at least once you've beat the next boss. Unicron's bastard son over here is called Zakat, and it's piloted by a Bomb Funk MC's tribute band. This is a fight that borrows a lot more from ZOE 1, but accomplishes far more in terms of spectacle and awe. The first half of the health bar is spent dodging or blocking the laser light show while you dismantle the shield manually, then slice its disgustingly conceptual spinal cord. The latter half builds upon this and goes all Ezekiel 1 disco ball, and develops more bizarre and interesting alternate attacks like gravity wells and homing mines. The interplay of evasion and attack is great, and I think it's implied you drain Zakat's subgauge by drawing their attack, thereby dropping their shield. The fight makes internal sense with your mechanics as well. With the fleet gone, Dingo can just go wherever he wants on the planet, so he goes directly to Armand's entrance, a battlefront Leo had been chatting about frequently. For our courtesy, we get held at gunpoint. That bastard tapers at it again, sowing distrust in Dingo, a Martian, ex-Barham frame runner, who's using a clearly fake name, whom apparently isn't even taking orders from the Space Force, because Ken isn't a spy. Ken was just some Barham soldier chick all this time. Dingo's actually just some guy in the system's second strongest orbital frame. You know what, Taper's kinda got a point. This is new information that comes from Executive Officer Elena Weinberg, the plot woman who emotionally blackmailed Leo in ZOE 1. She's talking to us as the strategic manager of this destitute Lev platoon, instructing them in their attack on the vicinity around Armand to find entrance. It's beyond hopeless. Even if they stood a chance technologically, there's been no evidence of competence from any of them at any point in the game. But this isn't an order. During the initial Martian coup of Barham, the Space Force did everything they could to try and maintain control, without much success. They're the same as Dingo. They've seen their units decimated, their comrades killed, even their families. They're willingly here to see through their mission to the end, as to not let their deceased's efforts go to waste.
死ぬぞ。
ならばそれが義務よ。生き残った者の義務よ。
なるほどな。
All too familiar, isn't it? Beyond not wanting Jetty to reach Alman, Elena might feel some possessiveness over the machine her boyfriend was meant to pilot in ZOE 1. Even she has a duty to those she's lost. Unfortunately, they can't have Jetty back. And they can't really take it back either. Opening fire would amount to suicide if Dingo defended himself. But yet, this is entirely understandable. Dingo, Leo, and the Lev unit are all suffering in the same way. They're all doing what's right and honourable by continuing the fight, even in the worst odds, even if it'll kill them. And now, even though they were once enemies, and some could have killed each other's comrades like Leo killed Viola, or the Space Force killed Dingo's unit long ago, they have the same goal, and for the same emotional reasons, to continue the fight. The unit lower their weapons. Elena respects their decision, true to her words. She isn't supplying orders here. Dingo demands command of the war with Leo. Just before going into this fight, Taper calls and tries to apologize, but Dingo tells him not to run away again. Even this lose is getting character development, but maybe Dingo's telling this to himself just as much. Your unit takes the Space Invaders formation, and the enemy takes the Torrential Rain approach. There's a lot of emotional power placed behind Dingo's newfound will to make good on his past mistakes by keeping the Levs alive. But this is nearly impossible. Even the initial cutscene sees some deaths before your fight has even begun. The atmosphere is chaotic. The air is dense with what's assumed to be kicked up dust as the enemy and Levs scour the floor in their battle, and it keeps the lock-on camera aimed downward, masterfully disguising the draw limit in the original hardware, having your picture of the situation on the map more in your mind. This scene was beyond the PlayStation 2's capabilities, but they absolutely did it, by showing less and not more, a beautiful concession. The music depicts this as a complete disaster, a horror. The enemies are all relatively low level and low health to increase the speed of the war and pad numbers, but they do enough damage. Ada recommends Phalanx for the occasion since it deals low damage for low subgauge. The problem isn't going to be whether or not you survive the fight, so there's one less worry. Health drops are surprisingly plentiful, as is sub-energy. But while you're gunning down Raptors to protect the Levs who can't really handle this situation, your in-game radio is filled with the panicked screaming of every grown man in this army afraid to die. SOS requests, Leo asking you to use Gazer on the damaged Levs so he can repair them. It's extremely unlikely to game over on a reasonable difficulty level, even hard as I'm showing here. But that means you don't get a do-over on your mistakes during this fight. Just as you're thinning their numbers, the music swells and a downpour of 200 enemies piles in from the top of the map. This is the point at which everything gets out of hand. Despite this being the easiest section to complete, there's an overwhelming feeling of pressure as you try to save every last one of those brave idiots, and likely fail in juggling each and every spinning plate. God damn it, it fits! Dingo's character development is fit perfectly. He's willingly gone back into the fray, seeing more and more people die who he's meant to be fighting alongside and protecting. This hasn't become any easier, this isn't suddenly a good thing happening, but it's an accepted part of war. All Dingo can do is try instead of running away. And even if you achieve S rank, Dingo beats himself up over it. He may not be entirely healed, he likely never will be, but he's now at least brave enough to face the reality of what's happened. And now he's shown the evidence that he's surmounted his character flaws. Z.O.E unlocks its true potential in the program Lloyde created. This program represents Lloyde and Ken's hopes and wishes for him. Their will flows through Dingo, empowering him, quite literally in this case. His initial development coincided with Wisp, the ability to immediately grab any target to him. And this time it's Zero Shift, the ability to instantaneously teleport to or away from any target. The initial issue with Zone of the Enders 1 was that Z.O.E and Ada comprised much of one character, and Leo the other. A mech is supposed to be the representation of the pilot's spirit in a way, and the extension of them. There's been so much effort to have Dingo's body language and essence flow through Z.O.E in this game, and Z.O.E back through him. Part of this was Dingo literally becoming part of the frame, and another had been matching his strengthening of character to the relevant abilities of the game. Dingo finally isn't afraid of getting close to people. Just as Anubis broke the rules of Zone of the Enders game engine, you can truly feel that power now yourself. By eliminating the careful interplay of spacing, the game has become a joke. It's made better by Z.O.E now having 3 add-ons that provide extra chip damage to every single attack you perform. Your health bar is embarrassingly large. There's no zone, it's all Enders. Z.O.E version 2.0 is a complete victory lap. It's so powerful it's disgusting. Ada's recommendations of how to fight could be construed as overconfident and hyped up if it weren't for a completely objective disposition. You can toy with them. The game continues to throw enemy types at you as fast as it can, but these level 4 to 6 enemies are going down as easily as the level 1s in the previous war section. Ada starts recommending counterintuitive tactics like long-range attacks, probably because it might just add more variety from what's becoming a disgustingly overpowered option. Just charging up near enemies will stun enemies like Gazer, even if they're attacking you. Just charging up once you've grabbed them will instantly destroy them. But oh shit, wait. We got a squad of leopards coming in from behind, with their own dedicated cutscene to introduce them. This is where the real challenge and they're all dead. Ken calls us during this unmitigated intrusion. She's here to provide the plot twist that she wasn't a Space Force spy, which is met with Dingo's casual acceptance. The evidence had been mounted and confirmed already. It's nice to see that Dingo accepts her so readily, even though this is one more thing that she's done to him. She tells Dingo that her soldier father died on Callisto, belonging to Dingo's unit, disposed of for Project Armon and the orbital frames. She joined Barum to find out why, and upon discovery, she wanted to usurp Nomen. From her perspective, Dingo has been a legendary runner who's still talked about to this day among his old workplace, assumed dead. He came back, in Z.O.E, the key to Armon, in the place her father died, like there's some kind of fate at work. Dingo looks sullen and murmurs the name of her father. He'd saved his ass more than a few times. Her guilt must be immeasurable. The situation is hopeless, especially from her perspective. She demands that Dingo abandons the mission, but he refuses. This is his duty to everyone who's died alongside him. Even himself, in a way. He's just as figuratively dead as the rest of them. I didn't think Nomen could appear any more evil, but here he is choking a woman out, talking about killing Dingo, begging him to come over like his parents are out for the weekend. I should mention Dingo's not suicidal. It's a particularly Japanese way of looking at life as a warrior. There's honor in dying for a righteous cause. He's also a foot in the grave anyway. This is, after all, just his purgatory, the weighing of his heart before he passes on. He claims there's only one person he wants to die with. No one is satisfied with that answer. There's an understanding of the situation being fated at this point. This is how it's meant to be. The next area is a formal test on if you're thinking straight. This section can last a very long time if you don't use Zero Shift to cut the hallway travel time remarkably. The blast you defend yourself from pushes you back decently far too. The problem is how eerily quiet this area is. Getting caught once sends you all the way back. I expect this was once a test of equipment swapping too, since you could always quick select grab. but that necessity is gone now. Whatever the point of this place, it's a beautiful set piece. The lighting really makes your bright turquoise feel like it's intruding on the dark red. The colour grading of this game has pulsated faster and faster into Anubis' base scheme of reds and blacks. From the cold rocks of Callisto to the metals of the battleship in Deimos, the blue cut to the rusty deserts of Mars, Noman's domain. Vasilia's concretes are darkened out so bright yellow artificial lights and digital red adverts can scorch through. The Grey Fox hallway fades the Martian sunset into a dark corner, and Viola's final resting place is a bright lava burial. As Dingo moved as a character, we cooled back down to hit Lloyd's place, and built back up to the red hues when Anubis drew closer. Once Dingo moved on again with Ken's final message, the skies over Mars became Dingo's home turf, and the only red was a distant second sunset from the altitude change, emphasizing that absolute and vast freedom. The scenery became dirtied and rustied again as Dingo joined in the war to the entrance of Alman, another test of his spirit which he defeated. The road to this hallway was blue once again, as Dingo evolved as a character. We've come a long way. We're at the entrance of Alman, home of Anubis, and all that stands in our way is one red passageway, by the blue dominance that represents Gitai and Dingo, which you will blow open with the Vector Cannon, which emits a brilliant, beautiful neon turquoise beam collapsing the red aura. When Dingo pushes Ada for an assessment of the upcoming battle, we confirm both frames are on par. But how she assesses the adversarial runners, if you have anything but S rank on both fights, which is extremely likely, Ada will very clearly state that it's hopeless, but there's no other choice. At best she'll say the odds are even. There's no positive outlook, even if you're a genius runner. She might need to work on a pep talk. Alman is vast, and there's very little Metatron reaction happening here. Anubis stands in our way. The fight starts without much fanfare nor challenge. With Jehati's newfound power, it's the same boss fight as always, except you can surmount the spacing problems. The desperation just doesn't exist. And if you couldn't tell from how I was going on about colour a second ago, this scene is entirely wrong. Dingo's at ease here, even though this is meant to be the final fight. This is going too well. Yeah, we needed another reason to hate him, so we put Ken in a fake Anubis. This utter villainy is escalating out of hand and he's displaying all the same obsession as Radam had, but there's not really anything to stop him. His evil might not be so disgusting if he didn't clearly take so much meaning and pleasure from it. He doesn't want to save Mars or Earth, he wants the opposite. Noman is trying to destroy all of it. It's time the game pulled the curtain back. The story isn't just about Dingo's retribution and reconstruction. There's been a recurring theme of human ineptitude and malevolence on a mass scale. Ken's a good place to start, but then there's the antagonism between Earth and its colonies, the state of Jovian workers being akin to minimum wage slavery, the slow re-desolation of Mars, the Space Force's complete lack of courtesy towards the Martians, the resurrection of Viola, and countless lies and betrayals. Noman, in his insanity, has a point. I said it before, humanity has a habit of spreading itself only to later start culling through war. It's human nature. Metatron has represented this succinctly. Properties allow for the Urumbek catapult to deliver humanity to once unreachable places. Noman is activating it right now to deliver Gitai and Anubis, nuclear power analogy sculpted into human form, directly to Phobos, which has been hollowed out and turned into Alman, a planetoid-sized Metatron weapon factory. Metatron is the feather against which humanity's heart is weighed. But you can't blame humanity without looking at yourself. Even Dingo's a bastard. Ken's a psychopath, Taper's a coward, Leo's naive, Viola's a murderer, the Space Force is racist, Elena is rash, and Ken's father was a member of Baram. The only characters safe are uncharacterized at all. The will of Metatron Noman talks about is that humanity isn't mature enough to hold this power. Just as Radam's fickleness led to his intoxication, just as we aren't mature enough to deal with nuclear power in the real world. The only ending Metatron can bring is auto-annihilation, the suicide of a species. There's been nothing but evidence of this all the way through the series. Gitai, along with much of its aesthetic armor and logical construction, has been stripped of its abilities and left without much but some basic primary functions. All subweapons but Zero Shift are gone. All long-range firing capacity is gone. As if you needed the odds put against you, you can only engage Anubis from short range. The only defense you have is offense, and Anubis wins in most lengthy confrontations. Naked Gitai, as a fresh playable state, has damage output and health bar carefully balanced for this particular fight, along with this limited moveset. Anubis' evolved boss fight is designed to counterplay this Gitai. By giving you both the similar ability to generate and delete distance at whim, the interplay of spacing is far less deliberate and far more binary. Impatience and Rushdown is punished with his distant burst attack in your face, sending you flying all the way back with the momentum destroying recoil. Zero shifting into this will actually double the damage. The most effective way of creating damage at first is patience. Manually evade his second long wind-up attack when it comes at range, using this moment of weakness to lay into him. Zero shift itself has half a second wind-up, which means it has to be used predictively, but it has invincibility frames against basic attacks at close range. Because the busy background obscures quite a lot at distance, especially on native hardware, your images are magnified as auras surrounding the two of you. It looks fucking cool. It's an imaginative visual when you're in condensed space. Those images might be some logical representation of your actual sizes in the Euclidean world beyond the limits of the Urimbek catapult. In Japanese, the title of this game was Anubis, Zone of the Enders, the sequel to ZOE, Zone of the Enders. Anubis' name was emblazoned on the title screen, with the endless tunnel of the Urimbek catapult zone dyeing the screen orange, the energy travelling into the iris of the Zone of the Enders logo. This battle really has been foreseen by the creators, and was an inevitable fate. A destiny of sorts. This game is named for its villain, and the omniscient and harsh judgment that the world and the characters face. And as it turns out, the Urimbek catapult is indeed the Zone of the Enders, adding to the amount of wordplay already present. Alphabetically, we've gone backwards, from Z to A. There's a universality to this, in which we're returning to nothing. If one alphabetized every video game in one's collection, chances are that Anubis ZOE might be the very first, and ZOE would be the very last. For contrast, Gitai's recent developments have been lightening its turquoise blue hues into brighter and angelic whites. At half and quarter health, Anubis visibly falters with satisfying explosions. Noman begins to play your way, avoiding making the first move at range. The combat starts revolving around close range as a natural result, and Anubis will even teleport in to thrash you with its scepter, and look at this! Look at this shit! Look at the fucking blades crashing! You fish out his attacks and evade, but that's just so he can fish out your attacks. The iframes on zero shift start to become a part of the close range game so you can avoid attacks, while still maintaining your positioning, but then he does it to you too? The motherfucker. It feels cooler to play it than it does to watch, and just look at it. Just look at it. We coalesce themes, drama, gameplay, making all of them technically interesting, visually beautiful, and just rad. The combat never becomes as panicked or as consistently visceral as the first game's heights, but this is damn close. Dingo calls for someone to pick up these two losers. They're safe at least. There's an extended conversation where it's reiterated that the original runner, Elena's boyfriend, programmed the self-destruct for Gitai in Alman irreversibly. Fortunately now, Alman will never be activated. Our Jet was goddess of the sun, and Ken does indeed shine with the harsh light of the sun on Dingo's personal struggles. Nephthys was most commonly associated with morning, piloted by Viola's AI ghost. In its name, meant to lead back the distant one, which indeed he did. He was also the god of war, and he does in fact benefit you as such. Zakat is a Muslim oath of generosity for those wealthy. Anubis is the undertaker of the Egyptian world. Gitai, the arbitrator of divine disputes, is acting as a kind of police for this divine roleplay. Finally, Alman, which has a complex history of representation beginning as the god of air, he slowly began absorbing the myths of all surrounding Egyptian gods, including creation, the strongest aspects of which related him to darkness, water, and infinity. These started relating him to the unknown. In that way, Alman became everything, almost monotheistic, the king of the Egyptian gods. The metaphors have always been a little bit mixed in the series. It's hard to avoid it when the planets are named for Roman gods anyway, but the skies, space, and celestial bodies, these are where almost all of our deities exist. As we explored space, it became clearer our larger universe isn't the stage for divine plays. Our night sky is a void so imaginably large it lacks a perceptive sense of depth. It's scary. But is it scary that there may be one or many beings out there judging us in some meaningful way with unknown consequence? The concept of fate is more horrifying than untethered free will, but what's more fearsome than that is free will with a caveat, such as hubris. It means we have a purpose we aren't achieving, and a fate that we could have avoided. There was never any particular reason to have two keys to Alman, nor to forge them into orbital frames, Our Mars' supposed construction being within Phobos is itself a peculiarity when Mars has more than enough uninhabited surface. There's no reason to construct a robot that locks itself in a coffin, or to make them look this cool. It's a blessing that these arbitrary and strange aspects of the series can be hand-waved as some kind of fate. I suppose it depends on how much faith you're willing to put into the creators. Upon inspection, Nomen collapsed into Arman, which can only lead to the destruction of the solar system. In agreeing to this final confrontation, Dingo adds one condition for the Space Force. Mars will be left alone, free to pursue its own political doctrines and develop its own true independence, and he demands so with the threat that he'll use Z.O.E to come after them. Dingo's retribution as a character has been to strengthen him to fight the fate of the universe, and give him a strong enough ideal to steel himself against the oppressive truth that humanity will only one day destroy itself. Unfortunately, one part of that is accepting that truth. All he can do is stave it off and become a deterrent himself. There's an optional suite of battles before the final boss, which aren't a challenge, but are a good way to stretch your fingers. The scenarios thrown at you become increasingly uncomfortable though. Our music is now dark and foreboding. From the crack of our Mars, several frame units spawn in, and then later, several violas spawn, likely as part of the weapons factory. In Z.O.E's damaged form, you can pull a Unit 01, and when you grab the enemy, instead of swinging them, as you mash the circle button, you instead devour them at their nape, as they writhe in your arms. Cutscenes through the game have had this kind of ethereal direction, with hanging, blurred shots. There's an uncommon amount of fade transitions using a primitive render-to-texture method. What is a supremely clean-looking game is often smudged to emphasize a trance-like state, especially when Anubis is involved. Motion's smoothed out to give a distorted emphasis on where the subjects of the camera are and where they have been. It might have been directorial preference to increase the sense of motion, but regardless, it fits with the themes of predetermination. Anubis' Metatron is combining with Arman's core in a symbiotic relationship. It's threatening to activate its destructive power. There's nothing more to be said. In fact, this is the only section of the game where you can't talk back to Ada. This is the finality of the series, and it hasn't disappointed. Anubis has lost nothing of its confident poise, only a similar amount of armor plating to Z.O.E, leaving its color scheme red and white. It's supplementing its missing body parts with hexagonal plating in the form of wings, and even a holographic Metatron halo. As it teleports, the plating returns to swirling around the environment before reconvening on Anubis' new location. This visual effect is insanely detailed for a game of this vintage, the plates crumbling from the walls as you approach. When you get knocked back, you hit the wall plating, and you can rip it the fuck out and throw it back at Anubis to cover yourself before you zero shift straight back into the melee flurries, which become more frequent with the return of God. There's a far more frenzied feeling to it, mostly because Anubis has become more forgiving. You can take risks more comfortably to control the fight's pace yourself. The balance of power is centered between you. Anubis' burst attack has either dilapidated or gained more shape with a gaping Pac-Man mouth that chases you down to eat you, animated in all of its particular vectors. Anubis now has a way to regenerate its health with larger plating, which needs to be destroyed as it surrounds him to prevent that chance. The music only maintains an electronic drum for the most part, now moving into full realistic sounding orchestra to up the ante. This environment is a hot and active white as opposed to a cold and snowy white for our opening. It fades into darkness as Anubis charges its burst, and the screen is dyed white with your own burst charge. There's a true sense you're fighting among digital clouds. This has taken the form of a battle for the world as we know it, among the celestial bodies, being ordained by whatever gods humanity has created for themselves. Toward the end of the battle, Anubis will start hastening its attack patterns to catch you off guard, and start armoring through your attacks. At range, it'll throw out smaller shots to suppress you at times. Victory can be so teasingly close, but you need to be patient. As Anubis hangs in the air with a slither of health, Dingo prompts Nomen for some final words on his crimes against his comrades. Nomen tells him they died like bitches. You can take that final hit however you please, to whatever level of overkill you determine he's deserving of. This has been such a long time coming for Anubis and for Nomen. This divine dispute is almost settled, but in severing Anubis in two, a Metatron reaction begins, starting up Arman's core. Leo, true to his character, refuses to leave Ada to die here, but that can't stop Ada's automated self-destruct process. He's the kind of person who would attempt suicide and put the entire solar system at risk to save one AI. And he does just that. He rushes the Vic Viper in to destabilize the Metatron reaction. Despite already relegating himself to this suicidal fight, Dingo can only try to help too, by venting Z.O.E's energy towards the core. Ada's disposition leaves her willing to try, but adamant about the futility of it all. But here, these two are trying to fight to save Ada in spite of themselves. She might just be the only character who's been nothing but good in this game. She was a creation of humans. She expanded beyond her initial capacity as a battle AI to hold compassion. It's probably the best evidence that we don't need to adhere to whatever dark fate we've been given by the gods. Even on a surface level, she's evidence that humanity, that was so harshly judged, can be more than it is, just as Dingo has become. But then a pitch-black sphere appears from the center, and rejects Leo outright, clearing him. But Gitai is stripped to its skeleton, before being enveloped into, not darkness, but negative space. Is there a valid religion in Zone of the Enders? One god condemned humanity for its foolish and disgusting faults. The other defended humanity as a flawed but highly potential species. But those were reflected by Noman and Dingo themselves, their own assessments personified by their orbital frames. My conclusion is that the aesthetic choice makes it easier to discern the meaning of this story, and by invoking fate, the story resonates more with the inherent human want to have assessment under a more powerful hierarchical being. It becomes seemingly more important than just us. Somehow in this world of pure energy, thoughts appear from the void. ANUBIS' AI is the only voice, the only sound in this place. It was created to destroy everything. In the AI's programming, that is the purpose of living. This stands in contrast to Ada's own purpose, to protect, to self-destruct and prevent total destruction. If Gitai and ANUBIS are both enough to activate Alman, then surely one can substitute for the other. To begin with, Gitai and ANUBIS were both created for this purpose. In this, even ANUBIS and its AI get an opportunity to use its power for the right thing. Dingo throws ANUBIS to the core in a symbolic gesture for this narrative theme, using the power and destruction that comes with it to avert catastrophe. The Metatron reaction collapses in on itself, and Dingo gets the fuck out of there! As Dingo slowly drifts through space, Gitai fractures and falls apart under the substantial damage. Ken was put into the false ANUBIS to show that Dingo had been attacking all the wrong people, and he'd been allowing himself to be pursued by the ghosts that he thought haunted him, and the commander who thought he'd be better off dead. This is encapsulated by the final scene of the game. Instead of allowing Noman and ANUBIS to judge him, he allows Ken to. All along you might say that she was the one weighing his heart since she had it in storage. The false ANUBIS is a better fit than the real ANUBIS. We pan out on Ken returning the gentle embrace given to her by Dingo at the end of the last video. As gentle as mech-on-mech embraces can be anyway. Showing Dingo's done right by the people he's allowed to get close to him. The people who should judge him. Leo and Ken rush over to see Ada and Dingo. As his vision fades back in, Ken's in something of a similar pose than when he'd been initially shot, but on the other side, smiling instead of determined. Ada's still operating, which was evident from Dingo still being alive himself. He explains what he did in the void briefly. Ada very meekly and cutely asks if she disobeyed orders, which is uncharacteristically adorable. It's the only time she's requested an assessment of herself. Mind you, it's the only time she's failed. I don't know if we actually redeemed Ken in the end, but I think the game's trying to tell us that people aren't always great, and even if they are evil or insane, there's opportunity for them to change like Dingo or Ada or Leo had. Use power for the right thing, or at least what you believe in. Ken assumes Dingo is quoting her, but in truth it was her father who first said those words to him. The game isn't PG enough to avoid the concept of romance, yet the team avoided forcing it into their relationship despite it probably being an easier and more typical ending. Instead, they create emotional meaning from having Dingo channel the role of godfather through Ken's familial relation. Dingo now has a life to lead of his own, not one in hiding, nor one with a collar around his neck. The final words of the game are "I trust you." Leo turns around looking at the resting, battle-damaged Gitai and the series behind us. This world and its people have earned a future. Every problem in this universe has been solved. After several games build up, the core antagonism between ANUBIS and Gitai, Leo's destiny, the background political tensions between Earth and Mars, and a moral thread from the very beginning about harnessing immense power for the right things. These have all been satisfied. Ken learned to trust and build trust in other people. Ada differentiated herself from her sister AI in ANUBIS by becoming more compassionate in her own way. Leo learned that it was okay to fight so long as it's for the right things. Even Taper surpassed his own cowardice. The ability to surpass our faults is what gives humanity hope, and the power it wields is far greater than ourselves. Beyond the Bounds is about that struggle. The mythical bluebird of happiness is referenced several times, and it coincides with Gitai, who is depicted with the head of a blue ibis bird. The lyrics are impeccable. The New Game Plus content is extensive and brilliant, especially where the special edition and onward is concerned. It may be a short game, but it's run dry for content. There's multiplicatively variant time trials on almost every gameplay section and boss fight. A fully fledged 2-player versus mode with attemptedly balanced design and well individualized frames, a complete Gradius parody unlocked by Konami coding with the shoulder buttons in Leo's fight, and a new Game Plus mode where you can play any version of Gitai with or without the full suite of subweapons. There's never anything that matches even base Gitai with its full subweapon set though. Making ANUBIS so powerful wrote the game story into a corner. Gitai needed to level the playing field with ANUBIS, and rather than disable the final boss, they empower the protagonist. The moment you get Zero Shift, we start playing a cinematic character action game. Most of the situational complexity is gone after this point, because normal enemies mean nothing. ANUBIS' attacks are simple and require focus rather than awareness. Worse yet, for the final boss fights, Gitai is stripped of anything but Zero Shift. Gitai becomes genuinely more powerful but entirely streamlined. Even replaying on the harshest difficulties, even against secret bosses, no equivalent frame has the AI or attack design to satisfy the complete arsenal, including Zero Shift and homing weapons. The strongest fights become typical enemies, as they more strongly choreograph, making Zero Shift feel like a necessity. In improving Gitai's combat design, they had the potential to meet the suffocating pressure and panic of Viola's final fight in ZOE 1 with a new fight, but this doesn't transpire. There's no true equal to Gitai. Nothing you can challenge meets your full potential. The game is too carefully designed, too thoroughly play-tested, and it may never be met, given the implausibility of a sequel. When Konami Computer Entertainment Japan became Kojima Productions in 2005, their output increased in budget yet decreased in variety and quality, focusing on trend-chasing game design. Metal Gear became a shoulder shooter, Castlevania became a hack and slash. The implied Silent Hill could become a Slenderman clone. Konami at the time of writing has ceased large-budget game development entirely. And during recording, they actually closed down more game studios. We may never see what ZOE could become, but maybe the dead should stay merely remembered, rather than resurrecting them as a hollow shell. The story is complete. The potential of this gameplay could be a worthy sacrifice. Without a sequel, this truly happy ending is preserved.
Nothing is meant to